Xanda's work has been featured in solo and selected group exhibitions in New York, Connecticut, Florida, and Massachusetts, as well as abroad in Paris and Budapest. McCagg's work is held in numerous private and corporate art collections. In her more recent work, in addition to painting and exhibiting, an extension of her studio practice has been to run art introductions, a series of art tours and events, as well as Xanda McCagg Project Gallery, a forum for events and exhibitions that highlights artists and art education. McCagg keeps a studio in Chelsea, New York, as well as a studio in Stonington, Connecticut. So is the work that we'll be able to see in pictures in a moment on view at the museum suggests, Xanda's paintings speak to memory, metaphor, and perception, using the language of line, color, and mark making to comment on the many dichotomies that shape our lives. Her recent work has focused on the theme of icons, totems, and relics, reflecting on sort of deep objects and images suffused with history, meaning, and faith. It's very exciting material. Thank you and welcome, Xanda. Xanda, you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
I thought I'd be a good. Well,
and I don't know if you want to, I thought maybe to sort of start off, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your work in the exhibition and some of these themes and ideas that we encounter in looking at the work.
Yeah, so thank you, Tanya. That was, and thank everybody for being here. A lot of you I do know, and there are a lot of people I don't know. The work in the show is ranges over about the last 4 years. I think there are 2 pieces from 2017 and then moving forward. And the most recent pieces are 2020, 21. But anyway, this idea of the icon, I usually work in series, and so the idea of the icon came out of upset about what was going on in the world. And I think when the images of like the Syrian refugee crisis started coming in, and all the, now the pandemic, but I've always been interested in people and humans. And so to see that suffering really impacted me. And yet I'm working with paint and in this abstract language. And I thought, what can I do? So I started to think about icons, Byzantine icons and relics that would have been at times very small, something that somebody could actually take and have in their home for solace, and as well as the larger, monumental works, and of course in religious settings, in churches, these huge mosaics, telling stories of humanity. So those are some of the ideas that are behind the work. So I don't know if you want to, yeah.
It'd be nice, maybe, Sophia, if you could share your screen and give us, images of some of the works in the show. And maybe, Xanda, I think, part of what's really interesting about this is thinking about process and, some of your mark making, and your, sort of how you've gone about creating this group of works. If you wanted to talk about that a little bit, that would be really great.
Yeah, so, as an artist in my work, I, often will have, a concept or a idea, icon, metaphor. These are not icons, but I'm hoping that, especially with the smaller ones, they're bringing the viewer in into a moment. So in the same way, or along with that, of course, I'm working with materials, and so one thing I'm going to do in this talk is go back a little so that you can see how I got to these pieces and into this abstract language that that has evolved and developed over the years. So I'm going to go way back to the mid 80s when I was at Boston University, and I got a fantastic classical traditional training where I was working from observation and rendering, light, dark, reflected light. And I always say that's the vocabulary that I now, I use again, the metaphor of poetry. So when I got out of school, I started to have trouble because I felt like I had to have an object there with a light source, and I couldn't really work. I couldn't break out of that, out of the skills that I had learned. And so, although I continued working from the model, I was interested in the human figure. At that time, I broke off and had this other body of work, which you see before you now. These are both from the 90s. They're two separate pieces. They are pastel on paper. And I started to make these people out of my imagination. And as you see on the left and on the right, you can pretty clearly see a light source coming down over the head of that little creature staring out at us, and also the interest in nature, that it's standing next to a tree. And so even early on, you can see I'm interested in relationships, not only of what I'm observing in nature and in people, in humanity, but yeah, so starting to take those skills and tools that I had gleaned in my education, or through my education. Anyway, so I made these wonderful pieces. It's so much fun to see them again for a number of years. And then I got to another point. I mean, as an artist, I think we all go through periods where we work, we're exploring, we're finding a certain way. And then you break out and I mean, Picasso is such a perfect example of this. He had the blue period, the Cubists, he did many different things in his career. So what happened is I was actually at the Vermont Studio Center, and I just started to tear up those people, and I started to collage them back together, and that opened up a whole other thing, just the space and the form. And so this is one of the earlier pieces that's in the show, but was at the beginning of these ideas about the icon or iconic work, perception. So you see here some of the basic elements of what I still, that I continue to work with the space and the line and the color forms put together into compositions. So that was a big jump that we made there, but I just thought, I think it's interesting to hear. It's not just a straight line of creativity, and it's really such a powerful process as an artist to, this is how I express myself.
That's
So
fascinating, Xanda. And your comment about sort of literally tearing pieces up and then collaging them back together, sort of, I don't know, there's a light bulb that goes off when you say that, because I feel like some of the elements, in this more recent work have that collaged feel to them, even though they're all painted. But
yeah,
there is that sort of sense of, with some of the kind of more hard-edged geometric forms, of those being something different that are kind of inserted along with the looser, the drip forms or the kind of more painterly material or elements within some of the compositions. So do you feel like that break was something that was fairly firm at that point, sort of after that juncture, you had this kind of liberation to move forward in this
yeah,
more abstract way?
yeah. I mean, it definitely was a point of departure. But but as I said, I was also still very much involved with working from observation, working with a model. And what happened is I started to, I'd work with a model either on paper or I was bringing big sheets of canvas and just pinning them on the wall and, big motor skills, and then taking them back to the studio. And what I started to do is take away from those. So I was altering them back in the studio. I mentioned it at my opening, somewhat like Degas would have been, somebody who observed things and then was one of the people who started to do studio, you know, going in and changing the work more intuitively. It's good to mention that. So the white, which is very prominent in my work today, is I use it as a subtractive method. Originally I did, and but really I go back and forth between the white. I'm really using the white as though it were a color, where usually it was be the background. And then another thing, these two pieces that we're looking at now, as you see, are very recent, and they're small. They're 12 by 12 inches, and I started working in this format. Well, there are a couple of different things here. First of all, the scale. So I'm working quite small, and then also, as you saw, quite large at the same time. And also, another point, getting away from the actual surface of the painting, is the use of the square, because for many years I worked primarily on vertical pieces. And again, the mind, if you see a vertical thing, it makes you think, building, person, tree, I don't know, something standing. And also, if you see a horizontal thing, you might be more inclined to think landscape, or something of that nature. And so I decided to just challenge myself by working on squares. So it was a compositional decision that I started to work with these squares, and I've been making them all different sizes. And of course, the line, I'll just say one thing. So, I've always had this strong, direct drawing. Um, it's like an urge to make marks. And anyway, it was interesting that you mentioned the stained glass, because I don't always talk about that. I'm not working in glass at the moment. But certainly those lines and the big color shapes, I could see some connection to my painting there.
Yeah, me too. It's very compelling. And it's interesting to think about, you're talking about verticals and sort of horizontal lines, but also the sort of these sweeping curves are really evocative as well.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know if there's meaning, that's sort of behind some of these forms that, seem to kind of hint at figuration in some cases.
Yeah,
I think it's always the human tendency to sort of look for forms that are familiar to us.
exactly. Yeah, and I would say particularly in some of the older work, I mean, I don't feel I'm not working from observation at all here. I basically have these again, kind of this vocabulary of the lines, the color shapes, but they certainly are rooted in figurative, because of that experience. And, I am thinking about relationships, as I said, of people, nature, but, of people and, even like what it's like to, if my hand is here versus if my hand is further away, that so that I'm thinking about these experiences of being human um, on a physical level and also uh, on a psychological level. I was trying to come up with that word. So,
Wow. I wondered, this seems to kind of get a little bit into, we had talked a little bit, and I wondered if you wanted to speak a little bit about sort of growing up and how your family life helped influence your interests and your career path as an artist and sort of some of the themes that you've gravitated towards, especially the icons.
yeah, I have I used to say I had such an amazing childhood, like how can I how can I go on, and I mean, I'm joking, but I was brought up by my father, who was a professor of history, Eastern European history, and my mother, of course, Louise McCagg, a sculptor, who because of my dad's or our dad's work, we lived abroad quite a bit. And even for shorter periods of time, like we'd go, um, we spent a lot of time in Budapest, Hungary, and Vienna, Austria. And so I was exposed at an early age to, for instance, in the late 60s, the happenings, so of the kind of conceptual Eastern European
Mm.
experience. I can remember being um, in a garden and just things happening, the artists putting up ladders and having balls fall off them, and I don't know, but so that Eastern European and being in the museums there and in the churches, so it really is again, I wasn't there all the time, but it was very impactful. And then we would come back, and we were out in Michigan, and
Mm.
had a wonderful, wonderful experience there by, getting off the school bus and going to my mother's studio. And I joke that thrown in the corner with a lump of clay. But anyway, so I've been exposed to the arts and history, and my it's part of my life, and I feel very grateful for that. Um, so yeah.
Fantastic. Also, sort of as I was looking at some of the details in your career, I was realizing that, and you mentioned a kind of this fascination with the human experience as a kind of foundation for your art. And I realized, that all these elements of different things that you've done seem to involve art making, teaching, and or sort of sharing and engaging with other people. And I wondered, kind of how that interpersonal sort of engagement element compares to or interact, sort of works with the solo art production. If those two things are necessary, to kind of produce the work you do, to have this kind of well of interaction with other people in terms of thinking about art and ideas. or whether you're happy to kind of retreat into a little bit of the isolation of the studio, how that dynamic works.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a wonderful question. For me, I need both. I'm such I'm very much of a people person, but I also, yeah, it's a balance of trying to find the time and the space to be able to do my work. At the same time, I am just fed by um, teaching. I'm not teaching in that formal sense right now, but it just charges me. And
Mhm.
I think the input is equally as important as having that alone time in the studio. So
Has it been a challenge this past year with all this time kind of in quarantine and isolation, or have you been able to kind of have have a few people that you've been with that have made it easier to kind of have that social aspect
yeah.
fulfilled?
Well, what a time we have been through and that we're still going through. Um, it has been quite an extraordinary thing. And because of circumstances, I actually have been out away from my New York studio for almost the entire year. Um, and I was working here in Stonington in my room here, and also had occasion to be up in New Hampshire in the beautiful place that my sister and brother-in-law have created. It's called Darwin's View, and it's off the grid experience. Um, so, so I have been lucky, and I also have my wonderful partner Tim, and I have a dear friend Joyce, who actually got an apartment here in the town, and we've been in the same bubble together. But what I would say is that thank goodness for the internet, and thank goodness for you know uh, organizations such as the Brooklyn Rail. I have been saved by they do these lunchtime talks, and they were free, and just, it was so cool having, there were a lot of people there. Sometimes you'd know somebody, sometimes you didn't. And of course it's different than getting together. But I just feel like this pandemic, it just emphasizes what social people we are. And again, how difficult it's been for people. It's impacted my work, I have to say, mainly because I just wasn't in a stable studio situation. But anyway, I often think about Giacometti during the war. They didn't have materials, they didn't have, it was terrible conditions, but he made these little figures out of matchsticks. And I remember when I saw those little, I think it was probably just some side picture in a catalog or something, but I thought, now that's, I understood that, like that's an artist. And I think I know so many people that are just continuing to work, even in this extreme isolation. So
The power of creativity is a
yes,
strong one.
yes,
I mean, and then that leads to sort of course, the question, the next one is to think about what you're working on right now. What sort of projects you're in the middle of, or what's ahead. And I see some things behind you that are
yeah.
really lovely.
I can't really see. Well, I guess if I go like this, you can kind of see I'm in my little studio that in the with the ideas of the icon and totem and relics. I have also, along with the work that's in the show, been just experimenting with different ideas. And you can see I'm piecing the paintings together. These are all in process. So like I move them all around. And I have to say that seeing the paintings that are hung so beautifully at the Lyman Allyn, in a somewhat of a formal setting, but it's been a very powerful experience for me as an artist to see my work. And because of the color and the dialogue between the paintings and in the color interaction, a la Joseph Albers, who I one of my great mentors in the box series there. But anyway, so it's just been inspiring. So maybe I'll break out and be doing some more installation, or at least piecing things together, maybe coming off the wall a little bit. And there's artist Donna Nelson. She's got a show up right now in New York, but she has been making these freestanding paintings and painting on both sides. And anyway, so I've just been aware of those ideas.
I wonder, in seeing this, it makes me think of some of those works on shaped canvases, in the way that some artists have kind of broken away from the traditional square or, rectangular format, to think about, I don't know, sort of expanding the boundary of a single piece, which it seems
exactly.
like
I think that's what it's about. Oh yeah, so this is an older painting, but you can see, I keep pointing, but I know you can't see where I'm pointing. But this is, these are some of the ideas that I've been excited about. And on the top, there's just a little teensy canvas. Well, you can see there are a couple of small ones there. It's the idea of, extending the piece. And the original idea about that was directly related to a crucifix. I had spent that time in Rome, and it's just so powerful how humans have created these symbols or these things that become symbolic for whatever. I mean, I'm not in a certain religion, but I do think the power of the image. And so I was thinking about having a central canvas flanked by smaller canvases. And as I mentioned, Joseph Albers, I'm thinking a lot about the interaction of color. And so on this one too, you can see there's that little green. It looks almost like a piece of newspaper there, but that piece actually comes off. It is Velcroed onto the canvas. And so I was playing with the idea, if you had, 3 of those shapes, you could, and they were different colors, you could take one off, like now it's green, but if that color was blue, it would change the entire painting. It would become a different painting. But anyway, so that's what that piece is.
That's so exciting. It really makes a huge difference just to think about sort of, it's veers into kind of some conceptual ideas of circumstance and, just, contingency, things like that in interesting ways.
Right.
I know, Sophia, I think you had some questions of your own and a few that other people had sent in to pass on, right?
Yes, so we did have a couple questions emailed in early on from visitors who came and saw the exhibition already. And one of them came actually after your opening. You mentioned the term masking, and they were wondering if you meant literal masking tape and how that is part of your process and how you've incorporated it. I know those smaller pieces we had looked at earlier, you said kind of represented that a little bit. So I can share my screen once again. So if you wanted to explain it, people can be actually looking at what you're talking about, which I think is always helpful.
Yeah, particularly in the piece on the right, the blue and white one, you can actually see kind of the remnants of, yes, masking tape. So it's part of the process of pushing into a composition, to put masking tape. And again, I was working off not a grid, but this cross idea. And again, not necessarily a crucifix, but could it be arms outstretched, and you don't know, is that somebody giving or taking or needing or anyway, or a tree, you can have a cross if it goes a little one direction, it anyway. But so yeah, that, and working with the pencil and going back and forth with the paint and the pencil and the masking tape. So when I'm putting the masking tape down, it's actually covering something up, and then I might paint over it or draw over it, and then I pull it off, and then that leaves the some of the previous information that was there. So that's what I was doing with the masking.
Wonderful. And I know we had a question about the graphite and when you apply it, but it seems you add a little bit as you go along. It's not first graphite, then paint, or vice versa. It's just
exactly. It's a
as you're going.
Very fluid back and forth. I often say that I'm articulating the canvas or the composition. So, I might put a finger mark is obviously different than a pencil line or a piece of masking tape. So I playing with those elements.
Wonderful. And then we had another interesting question come in, and it was asking a bit about how you know when a piece is done. I know many artists kind of have that feeling like you could kind of always make changes, but how do you decide when it's time to step away, or do you just never have that feeling?
Yeah. Well, I think that, it's the age-old question. And I think the answer is that often things will come to a point of feeling done, feeling in balance, visually, and but what I do experience is I might have a painting over in the corner for a couple of years even, and all of a sudden look over one day and go, oh gosh, if I just put that mark or crossed off that corner. So it is an ongoing process, but usually when I come to it, the other thing that's important about the work is that when I'm working, I'm turning the pieces, I'm working on the floor, I'm working on the wall. So I'm very active in my actual making of the piece. I'm not just standing at the thing. So that all has to do with what the end result is. And by having it, for instance, on the floor, you can walk around and get a different perspective, which is always important in the creation of anything, to edit. And and that's of course a kind of techniques and practices that most artists I know do move the canvases around.
Wonderful. I know that is always a question we get even in the art studio at the museum with the children. So it's really nice to hear your take on it. And then going back, we looked at many of the pieces in your work, and we had a question about the titles and how your process of coming up with titles, and if you had a common theme or process with it, or is it just after you're done, do you think of it before, kind of how the title comes to be?
I usually title them after the fact. Occasionally I'll I'll think of, I love words and meaning, and you know, I mentioned poetry, but just language, and whether it's a language that I even know or don't know. For a while I was studying Hungarian, and you know, it's just so beautiful. Like even the last letter of the word can totally change the meaning, and you know, so so I am kind of caught up in words in my own way. And so I often will, like I was thinking about a body of work that I did a number of years ago, and I was using the chrysalis, like the, you know, cabbage-like form, as the idea. And so a lot of the titles had to do with that, or, you know, cocoon and layers of things coming off. So, yeah, so, and also that I might put a title on it, but that somebody else might have another idea of what the word means, and their experience with the painting. So,
And that actually leads right into another question we had in regards to how you feel about how viewers have their own experience with it. I know everyone will see a painting differently. And I mean, when I'm bringing some of our children in to look at the paintings, and one of them in particular, I think everyone kept saying they see a melted snowman. So how do you feel about learning about what other people are seeing in your work versus what you had in mind when you created it?
well, I feel like the, you know, working in abstraction the way I am, and working with things that are so powerful in different ways to different people. In other words, what I'm seeing is going to be seen differently by the other person, and so I am just making the painting, and I, in fact, often hope to leave it a little open so that the viewer can kind of continue um, the expression of the painting, and it goes on by somebody else looking at it and taking the thoughts or the ideas out into the world.
Wonderful. Well, we do have a few more minutes. If anyone from the audience has any questions, you can feel free and either unmute yourself if you prefer, or send it in the chat. I can even pull up some images if someone wanted to relook at an image we'd already looked at before. But I did want to remind everyone that the show has been extended through May 16th. So you have even more time to come and see these paintings in person. So, anyone?
I'm wondering about the use of the word think. As an artist, is think the best word to describe how we proceed with our work?
I don't understand. Are you talking about a title, or that I might have used the word think in describing?
Think in describing how you arrive at the motivation for a new movement or mark on the canvas.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess think is one way to put it, but I suppose that responding to an intuitive feeling, or yeah, it's more like a response. It's like a call and response to the material and myself. I don't know if that answers it.
Oh yes, thank you. And I do understand that takes a lot more words, and it's easier to just say the word think. Yes. Okay. But it was lovely to hear that that's really what's happening. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, comments even? I know we have a lot of her fans here.
I have a question. So this is a non-artist question, so all the artists forgive this naive question. But my question is, so you talk about how when you are creating the work, it goes down on the floor or it goes up on the wall and you're moving it around and you're very physical with it. So, but I also understand that your paintings do have an orientation. In other words, if I go to hang one of your paintings on the wall, there's a top, there's a bottom. So how do you decide that when you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think it falls in the realm of when is it done? Because it's, again, I refer to writing. If you're writing something, you might put everything down one day and then go back the next day and edit, and then all of a sudden the thing kind of comes together. And it's that same process with the painting. I might work on it one direction for a while, and again, you can see the drips. I actually have one here. I did this but you can see the drips. This is a piece in process. And so I've been working at all different, viewpoints. This is not a square, but so eventually it just solidifies. I guess that's the only way I can describe it.
Just one more comment to that, because it's so interesting, because when you look at some of the works, the drips do seem to defy gravity, right? Because they're going against gravity in some instances. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely, it is so, it's wonderful working with, well, these are oil paint. I don't know if I said that, but I work with a medium that helps me to kind of expand the possibilities. So if you see the work in person, you'll see that I work very, very thin layers, almost as though it were watercolor. And then, more impasto thick paint. And then in between, especially with the drips, I'm actually holding the canvases up and letting it go until it's the right, again, it's something to do with the relationship of the parts. So I might stop the dripping from there, and then it might end up being, upside down and defying gravity. I like that. So.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I really like, I'm Roberta, by the way. I live in California. So anyway, and I go to the museum in the summertime when I'm there. And I love the way you don't stay restrained within the boundary of your canvas. Some of your paintings, like the paint is falling off the edge, and sometimes it's receding, and you seem to be reaching, you don't seem to be confined by the shape, the size of your canvas. And I wonder if, now looking at other pieces that you have in your studio behind you, you've added little pieces on the outside. You said you're now going further. And I wonder if that is part of this stepping stone, where sometimes the paint was falling off and now you're starting to actually construct things out of the periphery of your canvas. And I just love the way the paint is falling over and spilling, kind of, and other sides of that contrast, I think, is really, strong where it doesn't.
Oh, I love that. That's a great comment and question. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. And I do, there's always that decision. Do you, some artists will either clean up the edge or mask it out as though nothing happened there. And I just love, that's sometimes some of the best part of the painting. And for a while back, I was tired. I didn't want to take the time to stretch the canvas. I just wanted to get in there. So I would pin the canvas up and I would draw a square on it so that I'd be able to, after I finished it, I could stretch it. But what it ended up happening is the stuff that started going outside the square was really fantastic. So I ended up having a whole series of paintings that had the square drawn, and it did all come together. But that's interesting.
It seems that it's now adding those little pieces that you have behind, it's almost an extension of what you're doing now, that it's just the next kind of, feeling that, and painting outside of the canvas, I think is an interesting thing, that you're falling off and now you're adding more to it. I think it's interesting.
It really is. And of course, so many artists today are working in that way, in these ideas of installation. And so the space becomes the artwork. And those really those ideas do interest me. And so
thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question and a comment from Troy McCagg, who has one of your own old pieces in their home. And they wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more about it. I know it might be a little difficult to see, but the individual image wouldn't open. But I believe it is an early collage piece of yours.
Oh yes. Yeah, well that is a wonderful piece, and it's work on paper. And that was done at a residency early on. Oh God, it was one of the first ones that you mentioned. I'm having a blank here. Up in North Adams, Massachusetts there. It was before Mass Mocha was developed. And it was a wonderful residency in one of those old mills. And it happened to have been a paper mill, and they had these reams of paper, and it was heaven. You could go in and you just could work like on and on and on. So yeah, that's a very early work. I've gone through many different phases on the way to this work. At that point I was working really monochromatically, so just black and white, or browns and grays, and I did probably a year or two of paintings in the same vein before I went back to color. So color is very very complex. And so at different times I find it very instructive to, when things get complicated, simplify. And so that would be an example of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So we had a request to see the gallery view once more. So this is just one of the views, and you can see the color that Xanda was talking about.
And I think we're going to wrap it up, but I do want to note that the walls of the gallery, that picture doesn't really represent. They're this gorgeous, a bit darker, almost in the green realm. But anyway, so the paintings really pop on, the color really pops. So it's a great space. So
Yes, we have a few more minutes. If anyone else has a last minute question or comment, feel free to pop up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we will.
I would love to just thank everybody. Thank the Lyman Allyn Art Museum, and the Sophia and Tanya and Sam Quigley, the director, also, just for this amazing experience of having my work there, and also to have this talk, to see everybody and have a little discussion here. So thank you so much for coming to the talk. Appreciate
Yes,